Ode to the West Wind. Summary. Ode to the West Wind is an ode, written in 1819 by the British Romantic poet Percy Bysshe Shelley near Florence, Italy. It was first published a year later in 1820, in the collection Prometheus Unbound. The poem is divided into 5 sections, each addressing the west wind in a different way. The first 3 sections describe the wind's power to bring autumn to the land, sky, and sea respectively. The 4th section laments that the poet, since his boyhood, has been chained and bowed and lost the freedom he once shared with the wind. The 5th and final section invokes the wind as a force of inspiration that can breathe life into the poet's words and spread them throughout the world. The poem's final lines look ahead to the spring that follows winter. Each of the poem's 5 parts contains 5 stanzas. The poem opens by invoking its subject, O wild west wind. The first 2 stanzas focus on the wind's role as a bringer of death to the natural world, causing leaves to fall like pestilence-stricken multitudes and blowing seeds to the earth, where they lie each like a corpse within its grave. At the end of the 3rd stanza, the poet notes that the wind's azure sister of the spring, the east wind, will eventually cause these seeds to bloom, and fresh buds to return to the trees. The section concludes by observing that the west wind is destroyer and preserver, destroyer because it brings winter and death, and preserver because it plants seeds and creates the conditions for spring to bring them to fruition. Section 2 looks upwards to the sky, expanding our sense of the wind's power. Loose clouds, too, are shed by the force of the wind, as easily as leaves. The poet looks ahead to the fierce, stormy weather the west wind will bring. He says that the current cloudscape is just a mild foretaste of the weather to come, like the flying hair of a possessed dancer, Aenad, a figure in Greek mythology who worshipped the gods by entering an ecstatic frenzy. In the final 2 stanzas of the section, the poet again reminds us that the wind is a deathly force. Its sound is a dirge, a funeral song, and by shrouding the night in dark clouds, it will turn the sky into the dome of a vast sepulchre, tomb. The 3rd section of the poem turns from the sky to the sea. First, the poet celebrates the wind's power to waken the Mediterranean Sea. He describes a scene of ancient ruins on the Mediterranean coast, old palaces and towers quivering within the waves' intenser day before again expanding our sense of the wind's power by switching focus from the Mediterranean Sea to the Atlantic Ocean. The wind can cleave the ocean as easily as the sea. The imagery of flying foliage which began the poem returns again, but transformed, as the poet describes the sapless foliage of the undersea landscape, the sea blooms and oozy woods, disturbed by the wind as surely as the trees on land. At the beginning of section 4 the poet laments that if he were any of the things he has described so far, a leaf, a storm cloud or a wave, he would feel no need to address the wind in verse, as he is doing, because as a natural part of the landscape he would share the impulse of thy strength. He adds that even in his own boyhood, he was more like the wind than he is now, the comrade of thy wanderings. The poet prays to the wind, lift me as a wave, a leaf, a cloud. As an adult, he complains, he is too burdened by life, by the heavy weight of ours, to share naturally in the freedom and power of the wind. The final section offers a different prayer to the wind. Now the poet asks the wind to make me thy lyre. He imagines himself as a musical instrument, producing, like the leaves, a deep, autumnal tone as the wind blows through him. He asks the wind to let his spirit merge with the wind's mightier one, be thou me, impetuous one. Finally, the poet imagines the wind as a spirit infusing his poetry with power, driving my dead thoughts over the universe. He prays that his poem, Ode to the West Wind, infused with this power, will like the wind itself hasten the destruction of the old world and the beginning of a new one. If winter comes, can spring be far behind?